Horror strikes migrants at sea. Two underage girls allegedly raped on migrant boat to Europe amid worsening Balearic Migrant Crisis. Two girls, both reportedly under 16, were allegedly raped by men while traveling on a migrant boat en route to Europe, authorities confirmed. The boat carrying a total of 29 migrants of sub-Saharan origin was intercepted by maritime rescue forces approximately 43 miles south of Formentera last Friday afternoon. Now let's dig into this story together on the AI podcast.
Okay, let's dive right in. We're looking today at a really tough situation unfolding in the Mediterranean, the Balearic Migrant Crisis.
Yeah,
It's escalating and it's complex.
it really is. And I think our goal here, for you listening, is to pull out the key threads from the sources because they paint a picture of, well, two crises running in parallel.
Crises.
Yeah, you've got the immediate, awful human cost, things happening out at sea, and then back on land, you have this immense administrative pressure, the strain on the Spanish islands that's pushing things towards, frankly, a breaking point.
Right. So tragedy at sea meets sort of paralysis on land. You've got these horrific events on boats near places like Formentera, and then this political fight brewing between the islands and Madrid about who takes care of the people who survive. We need to look at both sides, I think.
Exactly.
Let's start with that human cost then, because there was a recent incident reported that's just incredibly disturbing. An alleged rape involving two underage girls, both apparently under 16, on one of these migrant boats.
It's horrific, and it just highlights the extreme vulnerability, doesn't it? The reports say this boat had 29 people on board, sub-Saharan origin mostly, picked up about 43 miles south of Formentera. Just that distance tells you something about the risks they're taking.
43 miles south. Wow. Okay, so when they were brought ashore, what happened? What's the immediate protocol, say, in Ibiza when something like this allegation surfaces?
Well, the process kicks in very quickly. The girls were taken straight to Can Mrs. Hospital in Ibiza. That's for medical care, obviously, but also for the forensic side of things.
Right.
And the investigation started fast. The next day, they brought in a team, 7 security agents, plus the on-duty gynecologist. It shows that even amidst this chaos, there are mechanisms, legal and humanitarian responses ready for survivors of assault.
It's crucial that those mechanisms exist, but this specific awful incident doesn't happen in a vacuum, does it? It points to a wider pattern of danger during the crossing itself.
Absolutely. We're not just talking about bad weather or engine trouble here. The sources mention prior reports, really extreme abuses happening during the journey. It's about the power dynamics, the control on these boats.
Things like beatings, abuse for protesting conditions.
Yes, exactly. People complaining about overcrowding, lack of water, basic safety, and facing violence for it. But there are even darker stories referenced, more anecdotal maybe, but chilling.
Are you talking about the alleged torture incident?
Yeah. I mean, the sources refer to this one report, incredibly disturbing, of maybe 50 sub-Saharan Africans allegedly tortured and thrown overboard by people described as witch doctors on the crossing.
That's almost unbelievable.
Whether every detail is court of law confirmed or not, the fact these stories circulate paints a grim picture. Extreme violence seems almost part of the fabric of the journey for some.
And sometimes legal action does follow, right? Even if it's tough. There was that 2024 case.
That's right. A young Algerian woman reported being raped by the boat skipper on her way to Formentera. And in that case, the alleged attacker was actually held without bail. So the authorities are acknowledging these crossings as potential crime scenes, zones of real vulnerability.
That vulnerability doesn't just stop when they see land, though.
No, it carries right through the whole process. Which brings us to the other side of the coin. The sheer numbers arriving, the volume is just overwhelming the island's ability to cope.
Right, that's the connection. The failure at sea directly fuels the gridlock on land. So let's drill down on those numbers. What kind of scale are we talking about for the Balearics?
The figures are pretty stark, especially for islands of this size. In just the first 9 months of 2025, the sources say 2,094 migrants arrived on 126 separate boats, just into Ibiza and Formentera.
Wait, 2,094 people in 9 months. Let me just, if that averages out to about 7 or 8 people arriving every single day.
Yeah.
Outside of any normal channels, that's an administrative nightmare waiting to happen.
It is. And it's not spread evenly either. Formentera got hit hardest. 1,829 people on 108 boats. Ibiza saw 265 on 18 boats. This constant stream of people needing immediate help, medical identification, legal aid, it's just not sustainable for the setup they have.
And that number, 2,094 in 9 months, That's the backdrop for the political reaction we're seeing now, isn't it?
Yeah.
The Balearic regional government covering Majorca, Menorca, Ibiza, they've made a pretty drastic move.
They have. They basically said no more, refusing to take in new young migrants. They're citing housing shortages, administrative systems totally overloaded.
And this is where the clash with the central government in Madrid really ignites, right? Because Madrid sets the overall policy, the mandates for care.
Exactly. But it's the regional governments, like the Balearics, that have to actually do it. Find the housing, provide the services on the ground.
So the central government, dealing with migration across Spain, told the Balearics they need to take in, what, up to 400 young migrants, provide housing, support, job help, like a quota.
Yes, a mandated quota. But the Balearic government's response was immediate and strong. And Tony Costa, he's the first vice president and spokesperson there, he called Madrid's directive incomprehensible and unacceptable.
That's strong language in politics. Incomprehensible and unacceptable. Why such a forceful pushback? What was his reasoning?
It really comes down to two things: timing and sheer exhaustion. He said the order couldn't come at a worse time. They're expecting more arrivals anyway. But more than that, he basically said the island councils, the ones who actually have to provide the care, are already in absolute collapse.
Absolute collapse.
Yeah. He stressed they have no workable plan to accommodate any more minors right now, let alone the 400 Madrid is asking for.
Okay, absolute collapse suggests they're way past capacity already.
Yeah.
Let's get specific about this gap they're pointing to.
Yeah.
What are the official numbers versus what they say is the reality?
This is really the core of their whole argument, and the gap is huge. Officially, the Balearics are designated and funded to care for 406 unaccompanied minors. That's the Madrid-recognized capacity.
406. Got it.
But they claim they currently have over 700 minors already in their care, housed, fed, needing services.
Hold on. Over 700 currently, against an official capacity of 406. That's almost double.
It is. And actually, if you dig into what the regional government is saying, they argue that looking after 700-plus kids means they're operating at nearly 10 times the capacity specifically allocated to them in the national distribution system.
10 times. How does that calculation work?
It seems to relate to a more specific internal allocation within the national system, maybe compared to population size or other factors, where their fair share quota was much lower than 406, perhaps closer to 70. So hitting 700 feels like 10 times that initial share. Regardless of the exact baseline, the point is this huge difference between the designated funded number and the actual number they're legally obliged to care for right now. That's the source of the collapse. They're doing it without the matching national funds.
So when Costa calls it a national shame, he's pointing directly at that funding gap. The region is covering costs for national responsibility. What does operating at that level of overload actually mean day to day? For the kids, for the staff?
It means services break down. You can't find enough suitable housing. There aren't enough social workers, case managers. Legal processing gets delayed. Integrating kids into schools, healthcare, it all gets bottlenecked. You just can't provide proper care when you're that stretched. Even with the best intentions, you're failing them.
Okay, so the system is overloaded, they say, massively so. And Madrid's solution is send more minors. Specifically from the Canary Islands. Why is that transfer the flashpoint?
Well, the Canaries have their own even bigger crisis from the West African route. Madrid often tries to redistribute minors across Spain, regional solidarity, to ease pressure points.
Right.
But the Balearics see this order, even just for the first few kids from the Canaries, as reinforcing a broken system. They feel accepting even two more validates Madrid's approach without addressing the resource deficit that's crippling their councils. It's become a line in the sand for them.
A symbolic stand, then, as well as a practical one? What's their next move, politically and legally?
They've explicitly said they will block the transfer of the very first two minors scheduled to come from the Canaries under this new order. It's not just talk. They're gearing up legally. They plan to use all available legal channels to fight it.
And their main argument in court would be?
Their current overload. That 700-plus figure versus the official capacity, they'll use that to demand Madrid either provides the resources to match the reality or halts the transfers until the system is fixed.
It sounds like a major legal fight is brewing. But these are kids needing care now. Is there any sign of dialogue, any way out of this confrontation?
Thankfully, yes. It hasn't completely broken down. The central and regional governments have agreed to meet. There's a date set, October 6th. The Secretary of State for Children, Ruben Perez, is meeting with the Balearic Minister of Families, Sandra Fernandez. The sole topic is this capacity crisis in the island's reception system. So there's a chance for negotiation.
Right. So if we pull all these threads together now, the horrors at sea, the overwhelming numbers, this political standoff, what's the main takeaway for you, the listener, trying to make sense of it all?
I think the sources really hammer home one point. The humanitarian crisis at sea, the abuse, the violence, the vulnerability, isn't separate from the problems on land. It directly feeds the administrative and political breakdown.
How so?
The tragedy doesn't end when a boat lands, it just changes form. It becomes a crisis of who pays, who has space, whose responsibility it is. You get government levels fighting each other while the vulnerable people, especially children, are stuck in the middle.
That connection is stark. From, unimaginable dangers miles offshore to the collapse of the very systems meant to protect the survivors once they arrive. Managing both a human rights emergency and an infrastructure meltdown at the same time.
Yeah.
It's incredibly difficult.
It really is. And maybe here's something to leave you thinking about, reflecting on this whole situation. The Balearic government says they're operating at potentially 10 times their specific designated capacity, dealing with over 700 miners against an official quota maybe closer to 400, or even less by some internal metrics. So the question is, what specific mechanism legally or administratively actually needs to happen at the national level to fix that? How do you bridge that massive gap between the immediate need for care on the ground and the funding and rules coming from the central government? That negotiation, that's the crux of what happens next.
Okay, one question for you. What psychological and medical assistance is provided to young victims arriving from migration routes? Don't forget to comment it. Thanks.